Okay. In the first round, I'm not going to be very intrusive. I'm saying that probably I give you in the first round 15 minutes each. They say a good speaker you only need about what 3-4 minutes to to put your idea across. But we know this issue is sometimes quite technical, so we give 15 minutes each. And we more or less, I think, have the consensus. I think if I ask you, you would agree that it is only proper to start with YB Muhammad Hanifah Maidin first. So without much ado, I would like to hand over this mic to him.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good evening. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahilladzi hadana lihaza wa ma kunna linahtadiya laula an hadana Allah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man da'a bid'awatihi ila yaumiddin. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, the learned panelists, and all the brothers and sisters. I don't know whether the title of the forum is right. Hudud at Malaysia. I suppose it's Hudud at Kelantan. Because past we never at this moment intend to implement it or to widen the implementation to throughout Malaysia, because as far as past is concerned, we believe that only if the people give the mandate, then we have legitimacy to implement any law. Of course, as a Muslim, we prefer the hudud law in dealing with crimes. So before, it's quite difficult to be. I like to hear the counter arguments first, then I can reply. But of course, part of my speech have been hijacked by the moderator. So making my presentation is much easier. So I don't have to explain the crimes, what really hudud are. But in order to understand why the Muslim, in particular the Islamic party like PAS, insists to have a penal Islamic criminal penal system. This is because the nature of Islam itself. We Muslim, we believe that Islam regulates every single of our activities. That's why, if you really study Islam, even you want to go to the toilet, you have regulations. Where you want to enter to the toilet, which leg that you have to use. You want to see how you want to wash everything in all aspects of our life. Islam provides rules and regulations. This rule and regulation derive either from the Quran, which we believe is the book of God, the words of God, and also from the Prophet's traditions. So that's, if you ask me why I pray 5 times per day, it's because it is provided or prescribed in the Quran. When Allah says, Aqimus Salah, perform Salah. So the Muslim jurists, when they said Aqimu, they said this is imperative, it's a command. Al-amru lil-wujub, every command, unless there is what do you call it, other injunction invalidates it, it's tantamount to obligation. So the same thing. If aqimu, the word aqimu means perform the prayer, is mandatory, the Muslim jurist also says that when, for instance, for the hudud law, like crime of theft, we have Quranic verse which states, wasariqatu wasariqatu faqta'u, the male thief and the female thieves, you have to cut off their hands. So the word cut off is tantamount to imperative from Islamic jurisprudence. So we have no alternative. Because the Muslim, we believe that whenever God says that, unless it is not imperative, you have to implement it. Of course, the difference is, when it comes to prayer, it is an individual business. But when it comes to the penal punishment, it is not individual's discretion to implement it. It rests to the state. In fact, there is a similarities. Because the crimes, in fact, any crime, either in Islamic system or the secular system or the civil law, crimes in actual fact is a crime against the state. That's why the state initiates the action. So the same principle applies in Islamic law. That's why the only Islamic penal system has been in the Quran since the Prophet was sent down to the Prophet Muhammad was sent down to the whole mankind. So we believe that, as I pointed out just now, we believe that hudud are part and parcel of God's command. So we are obligated to adhere to it, to them, and so we are also obligated to implement it if we have power. So coming back to the political scenario, the Kelantan government since 1993 have been advocating the intention of implementing hududs to the Kelantanis or to the Muslim in Kelantan. So we put our agenda in the manifesto, then people supported it, people supported our agenda, people gave mandate, people endorsed the mandate. So based on the mandate, in a democratic country, you can only carry out your ideas or your agenda if you get the mandate from people. Because democracy is about people. So when Kelantan, we put up our agenda, we say that this is our agenda, among other things we want to implement hudud. So they endorse it, they gave the power, they gave the mandate. You tell me, as a political party who involved in democratic process, when the people gave that political party a mandate, is it undemocratic for us to not to continue with our agenda? So looking from that perspective, I believe that the Kelantan has democratic rights, has every democratic right to implement the hudud law. Hudud law in nature are very harsh, but that laws are only reserved for certain crimes only. Even corruption is considered as a bad or is a worse crime, but it does not fall under hudud. So hudud law are only reserved for serious crimes. Then the seriousness of the crime must be viewed from the Islamic standard. That's why the non-Muslim may have a different standard of saying something. For some, maybe they said adultery is not really a crime. That's their standard. We have to respect that. But as far as the Muslim is concerned, for instance, because adultery is one of the crime tribal under hudud. So in Islam, adultery is considered a serious crime. But there are two crimes, two punishments For zina, we call it zina. Those married couple and unmarried couple. Those who have already married, you are not supposed to to commit adultery because you already have your wife. So Islam viewed familial relationship as very, very important. That's why at the very beginning, when we have daughters and sons, even at the minor age, 7 years old and 8 years old, we have to separate the daughters and the son. We must provide a different room, because we don't want to cultivate the seeds of sexual, what do you call it, impulse from the very beginning. So that's why Islam provides certain safeguards. Of course, in Islam, marriage is promoted. So state has to facilitate. If you don't have money, state will assist you, or provided the people's money are really used properly. I understand that if you viewed penal punishment in isolation from the whole concept of Islam, it may be considered as harsh and maybe draconian. But if you view it in a holistic understanding, you may agree that why Islam is so serious in also is so what do you call it, is so serious in promoting this penal punishment. And one essential point that you need to bear in mind, unlike the ta'zir punishment, we call it discretionary punishment. In other words, the judge are given full liberty to implement any, that's why we understand that all the laws are in penal code are considered ta'zir. So there is no need for us to have a different law for ta'zir. Only in hudud crimes, the standard of proof is extremely high. You don't have a very high standard of proof in other crimes except in hudud. In our present system, all the crimes have to be proved beyond reasonable doubt. That's the present standard of proof. But in Islam, as far as hudud laws are concerned, the prosecution has to prove it until certainty. It's not beyond reasonable doubt. It is beyond any shadow of doubt. It's almost impossible. Yeah, because the idea is not really to implement it, to impose the punishment. That's not the very idea. The problem in our problem is because all the Islamic countries which implement hudud, they are corrupt government. They are failed states. That's why you don't. If Norway, if Sweden, if Switzerland implement hudud, it's much easier for us to campaign. If England implement hudud, it's much easier. But when we have Pakistan, failed states, implement hudud, of course we are in difficulty. I believe that hudud is meant for a perfect Islamic governance. If good governance, good policy prevail, that's how hudud should be promoted. So you may ask, how about Kelantan? Okay, so far so good. We have not even a single adun is being subject to corrupt practice. Anyway, I'm not saying that Kelantan is the perfect example, but give it a try. After all, Kelantans want to implement hudud for the Muslims only. Then one thing, we have been advocating for 23 years. When I went to UK, I met some of the MPs there. I remember the last 20 years. So the question of hudud also was asked to me. They said, why, how can you want to implement hudud? I said, that I told you here. Then I said, even when we want to implement, when we got a power in Terengganu, before we implement it, we call all the people to give their views. In this respect, we are much better than Barisan Nasional. Because in Parliament, my experience, they drafted, they introduced many bad laws without consulting us. Am I right? Recently, they introduced, they amended the drug law. You don't even, maybe some of you don't even realize. They introduced double presumption. Only 3 MPs from Pakatan who understand the issues and debated. Not even single MPs from BN understand the law, including the minister. This is double presumption to be implemented for a penal, for a capital punishment. I don't know whether we have criminal lawyers here. Recently, when the government introduced PCA, they also introduced what they call it minimum sentence. Minimum sentence is almost equivalent to hudud. Because in hudud law, when it is 100 stripes, you cannot change. The judge, the prosecution has no business to change it. It is fixed. That's why they call it hudud. In Arabic, they said al-uqubah muqaddara, fixed punishment. In law, they call it minimum sentence. Some of you may say, why we have minimum sentence? But the Malaysian government, in PCA, you have almost 10 or 15 offences which carry minimum sentence. I, the one who objected it. For me, as far as the minimum sentence are concerned, it's only reserved for the God's law, not for the ta'zir. Because in Islam, when it comes to ta'zir, punishment, you give a wide discretion to the judge. But here in Malaysia, we have laws which tie the hands of the judges. In many laws. The last day for this session, oh, I'm already 15 minutes. Okay, I've stopped. We see the second round. Thank you very much.
Okay. Sebenarnya lebih sikit tadi daripada 15 minit. We'll be very charitable tonight. Alhamdulillah, the crowd is very good. Probably we should have booked a bigger hall, but nonetheless. Okay, I don't think I need to summarize what YB has mentioned. I think next we go to our second panel. Shahrizan Johan read law at Cardiff University, graduated 2005. Cardiff is important, you know. We also studied in Cardiff. Yeah. Appointed co-deputy chairperson of Bar Council Constitutional Law Committee. Okay. The committee behind the successful My Constitution campaign. He's also now the chairperson of the Constitutional Law Committee for 2011-2012. Deputy, eh? All right. Lost there. Okay, and he's an elected member to the Bar Council and has been serving since 2012. Wrote many articles, some in Lawyer Bureau, you know. But he's not Lawyer Bureau, you know. Okay, I think I'll leave it to him to make his points.
Thank you, Saudara Moderator. First of all, I just want to make one thing clear. I'm not here on behalf of the Bar Council. My views are entirely my own. That gives me a lot of leeway to say what I want to say. Okay, it's a bit... The presentation isn't so... So can you make it a bit smaller? Because yeah, just so that maybe change the fonts. I'm so sorry. The font is a bit too big, I think. This will not go to my 15 minutes, I hope. Okay? Okay, that's a bit better. Okay. So where was I? Yeah. So I'm here on behalf of myself, just to add to the discussion. And before I start, I actually have set out what is hudud and all that, but Mr. Moderator has actually done that for me. But I just want to make some points. Firstly, I think a lot of the discussion about hudud comes from a place where those who support it and those who are against it don't really understand what it is. And so you get a lot of discussions talking about something where people don't really understand. And in this, I think the responsibility of the people who actually want to implement it, it falls upon their shoulders because they want to implement it, so they have got to make people understand. And I don't think this has been done sufficiently enough. I'm not saying that PAS is not doing its job, but there are other people out there who are supportive of it, but are not doing their job to try and explain to people. And a lot of discussions out there, whenever you see a Muslim person in opposition or saying that it cannot be implemented, immediately the first question is whether you're a Muslim or not. Why are you going against God's laws? Okay? And when a non-Muslim questions it, the non-Muslim is told that, look, this doesn't concern you. Why do you even care? But I don't think this is the correct approach when you talk about something like this. Because it doesn't matter whether a Muslim or non-Muslim, this concerns us all. Okay? If we keep looking at things from the spectrum of divisions as to, I have to look at something from my point of view and, as a Muslim without caring about what other people think, then we can never ever achieve true unity in this country. So, wow. I didn't expect that, thank you. Okay, so first few points that I think which has not been stated. In Islamic State, no such thing as separation between church and state. It's all encompassing. As I've mentioned, hudud is just one part of Islamic criminal law framework. There's all these other things which the moderator has actually mentioned. Next. Okay. Hudud are the most serious crimes. Also, I think YB Hanipah and the moderator has also mentioned this. They are actually seen as crimes against God or crimes against limits ordained by God. So the responsibility is upon the state to punish these crimes. And as YB has mentioned, punishments are fixed. They cannot be reduced if a finding of guilty is made. And these are the four. Of course, the last one, the opinions, as the moderator has mentioned, is a bit divided, whether it is part of hudud or not, apostasy. But the rest, I think, is quite settled. Okay, next. In an Islamic state, hudud is for all, not just for Muslims. Okay, of course, except for drinking alcohol and apostasy, I mean, for obvious reasons. You cannot be guilty of apostasy if you're not a Muslim in the first place. The burden of proof, as YB Hanipah has mentioned, is very, very high. It's not just beyond reasonable doubt, without any doubt at all, beyond the shadow of any doubt. Oh, what happened? Okay. I tell you what happened. I actually used the Changi font, and I forgot that it's not installed in this system. I'm so sorry. Okay, where was I? If there is any doubt as to, or if you cannot satisfy that burden of proof, then that sentence can be commuted down to Tadzeh. Okay, you have to understand that. And there's also the principle of taubat, where if you have repented, then the state can actually not implement or not punish the offender. Because taubat is a very important part of Islam. Okay, next. Hudud as proposed by PAS. This is from my understanding and from what I gather from the news reports. As YB Hanifah has mentioned, it's only for Muslims. And this is also what I gather from the reports. Offences are to be tried by the Sharia courts, okay, not the civil courts. And from a report by the Malay Mail Online, dated 29th April 2014, the Deputy Menteri Besar of Kelantan mentioned that 2 private members' bills will be introduced in Parliament. The first bill is to seek approval to enact punishment for crimes under the Penal Code. And number 2, the second bill is to amend the Sharia Court Act to give freedom for the state to enact punishment higher than what it is now. We shall go into detail in my presentation in a while. And I think YB can confirm or deny this later, perhaps, whether these are the 2 bills that will be presented in Parliament. So what are the challenges to implementing hudud in Malaysia, or rather in Kelantan? The first immediate challenge is with regards to the jurisdiction of the Sharia courts. The Federal Constitution, under the 9th Schedule, provides that the Sharia courts shall have jurisdictions only over persons professing the religion of Islam, and in respect only of matters included in this paragraph. It gives a whole matters, but shall not have jurisdiction in respect of offences except insofar as conferred by federal law. What this means is that the Sharia court's criminal jurisdiction is decided by Parliament. And that is why we have the Sharia Courts Criminal Jurisdiction Act 1965. According to this act, the Sharia courts can only mete out punishment of imprisonment for a term of not more than 3 years, fine of not more than 5,000 ringgit, and whipping of not more than 6 strokes. So no Sharia court in Malaysia can impose punishments more than what is stated in this particular act. So the immediate challenge or hurdle for PAS to implement hudud in Kelantan is this. So what it would need to do, next please, is to amend this particular act, to give the powers to the Sharia courts in Kelantan to mete out punishment more than what is stated in this Sharia Court Criminal Jurisdiction Act. So that's the first one. And this can be done quite easily. You get a simple majority, it's passed. And then Sharia courts would have jurisdictions to carry out punishments such as amputations and even death penalty when it comes to hudud. Okay? The second challenge or hurdle, next, is the jurisdiction of the states to enact criminal laws. Okay. Now, if you look at the Federal Constitution, the 9th list, it states that the Federation has jurisdiction to make laws for internal security and also for civil and criminal law and procedure and the administration of justice. So, under the Federal Constitution, the power to make criminal laws is vested in Parliament, in the Federation, not in the states. What powers do the states have? You look at the state list. States have jurisdiction to make laws for the creation of punishment of offences by persons professing the religion of Islam against the precepts of that religion, except in regard to matters included in the federal list. This is where the states have powers to make laws such as punishing people for halwat. Or if you don't, some states where if you don't go to Friday prayers for more than 3 times, it is a Sharia offense. And there's a lot of other things, okay? The jurisdiction is found in, to actually enact criminal laws, is found in the federal list. Next. So as I've mentioned, state law cannot make into an offense what is already a criminal offense under federal law. So if you have the penal code, for example, and you have offenses in that penal code, the states cannot enact laws that basically have an equivalent in the penal code. So if you see the Sharia enactments throughout the country, you will see that the offenses in the Sharia enactments, they do not have an equivalent in the penal code. I give a good example. Prostitution itself is not a criminal offense. It's not under the penal code. What is an offense is for you to be soliciting for the purpose of prostitution. Okay? But under the Selangor enactment, for example, prostitution, melacurkan diri, is actually a Sharia offense. So do you see? So there isn't an overlap. And for good reasons, you will see later. So the second challenge is the jurisdiction of the states to enact criminal laws. That is why PAS wants to put a second bill to introduce or to allow, to get Parliament to allow Kelantan to make criminal laws which is under the federal jurisdiction. And they can do so because of, next please, sorry, it's not here. And they can do so because of Article 76A of the Federal Constitution, which provides that Parliament, the matters in the federal list, which includes criminal laws, have the power to authorize the legislatures of the state, to authorize the states to make laws in respect to the whole or any part of that matter. So meaning, Parliament can authorize the states to make criminal laws. And this is what I believe PAS is trying to introduce with the second bill. Okay? Now, again, it would appear that all you need is just a majority passing this particular bill to allow it. Because it is provided for under the Federal Constitution, you don't need to amend the Federal Constitution. However, this is on the face of it. Next. Oh, it's really next. Okay. I would argue that the power of Parliament under Article 76A would not be enough to empower the state to enact criminal laws. This is because criminal law under the federal list empowers Parliament to make laws for everyone, not just specifically for Muslims. Okay? So because they don't have the power to actually make a differentiation between whether you're Muslim or not, in terms of criminal laws under the federal list, they cannot therefore give this power to Kelantan. So this is my argument with regards to the second bill, which I say that even if they pass it, it would not be enough. Third challenge. Say both these bills get passed by Parliament. Simple majority, UMNO decides suddenly to be Islamic and work together with PAS, and it is amended. Okay? When it comes to implementation, you've got a constitutional hurdle as well under Article 8. Article 8 is what we call the equality provision. All persons are, in theory, equal before the law and entitled to equal protection of the law. Doesn't matter whether you are a minister, doesn't matter whether you are a marhain, doesn't matter whether you are a lawyer buruk, you are all supposed to be equal before the law. Article 8 further provides that except as expressly authorized by this constitution, there shall be no discrimination against citizens on the ground only of religion, race, descent, place of birth, or gender in any law. This means that you cannot be discriminated in terms of law unless expressly allowed by the Federal Constitution. And then further on, it says that this article does not invalidate or prohibit any provision regulating personal law. Next. Implementing hudud in Kelantan, I would argue, would offend Article 8 of the Federal Constitution. Why? Firstly, because there would be different criminal laws for Muslims and non-Muslims in Kelantan. So the question immediately is that what if a crime jointly committed by a Muslim person and non-Muslim person, what happens then? Okay. There is also discrimination in terms of, more stringent laws and extra laws actually against Kelantanese Muslims vis-a-vis the Muslims in other states. Because a person in Kelantan or committing a crime in Kelantan, for example, would be subjected to the hudud, whereas in other states you're not. Okay, and Muslims in Kelantan, as far as I know, because I don't see any moves to amend the penal code, would also be subjected to the penal code on top of hudud. These differentiations, this discrimination or differences in the law is not expressly authorized by the Constitution, nor can it be saved by the proviso for personal law. Because we are going beyond personal law. Personal law, you're talking about perhaps marriage, inheritance, and all these other things. This is beyond that. So it cannot be saved by the proviso which allows for differentiation in terms of personal law. Okay, and when you talk about personal law, that's why, for example, you cannot argue that, oh, why is it that as a Muslim, if I want to get married, it's so much more difficult than a non-Muslim who wants to get married. Okay, you can't argue Article 8 because the Federal Constitution allows for it. This is personal law. Federal Constitution says for personal law, you can have laws which might offend Article 8. But here I would argue that it doesn't save this implementation because of that. The fourth challenge or hurdle to implementing hudud in Kelantan is that it would offend Article 7. Article 7 is the prohibition against, Article 7.2 is the prohibition against what we, in layman's term, or if you watch American dramas, it's called the rule against double jeopardy. Once you're tried for something, you cannot be tried again for the same act of offense. Here, okay, you might actually come to a situation where a person might be charged under the penal code and also charged under hudud. Okay, so again, this would offend Article 7 of the Federal Constitution. And the fifth hurdle is that this is a circular constitution. Now, of course, you're going to have the argument of whether it's circular or semicircular and all that. But what is clear is that Malaysia is not an Islamic state, regardless of what Dr. Mahathir says. Okay? Malaysia clearly isn't an Islamic state because it puts the Federal Constitution as the highest law of the land. Now, to make hudud, and this is more of a technical jurisprudential argument, to make hudud, which is essentially crimes against God, an offense, would mean that the state are empowered to punish individuals for going against the limits ordained by God. Okay, dah nak habis dah. Okay, so I would say that as Malaysia is not an Islamic state, it would tantamount to putting the responsibility on the state to punish those who transgress limits placed by God. So I would say that Malaysia must first be made into an Islamic state. So very quickly, I have to just wrap up. Overcoming the challenges. Question is, can Kelantan implement hudud as proposed by PAS? The answer, in my opinion, is that challenge number one, with regards to the Sharia court's jurisdiction, needs just a simple majority. Challenge number two arguably needs a constitutional amendment, but it could perhaps be passed. But challenges 3, 4, and 5 certainly need constitutional amendments. Even if these two bills are passed and hudud is implemented in Kelantan, I would say that if you challenge it in court, there is a high possibility that the court will strike it down as unconstitutional. Next. So, the answer is no, unless the constitution is amended. Just my last point. Next. Can the constitution be amended for Kelantan to implement hudud? This is where what we call the basic structure doctrine comes in. Constitutional amendments that disturb the basic structure of the constitution is unconstitutional. This is what the basic structure doctrine means. This means that, for example, if you change the Malaysia, the constitution, from a democracy to become a communist state, for example, you are actually disturbing the basic structure. The basic structure of the constitution is that it is a parliamentary democracy. If you make that amendment, then you would disturb the basic structure, and this constitutional amendment would become unconstitutional. So I would argue that amending the constitution to make Malaysia an Islamic state and amending the constitution to take away safeguards in Articles 7 and 8 would disturb the basic structure of the constitution, therefore be unconstitutional. So I think I'll stop now. I've actually got other points which is beyond the legal arguments, but perhaps we can take it at the second round. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sharizan. Okay, everybody is still concentrating. That's quite... I think we are being educated here tonight. I think without much further ado, I think I'll present to our next speaker, Dr. Farouk.
I need my slides. Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. Chairman, esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi. I guess I'm going to approach tonight's topic a little bit different from YB Hanifah and Sharizan, because I guess you know what was being mentioned by YB just now was nothing new. I thought I came here to learn something new, that he had some hidden bullets that should be very, you know, incisive to say that hudud must be implemented in Kelantan. But I was surprised somehow. In which way? Let's go, because could you just switch on my slide, please? I would like to reiterate what he said, which is true, that you know, this is the version of political Islam, that Islam is a deen wa dawlah, right? Islam is a deen and also a government, right? And because of that, PAS wanted to implement hudud. And I said in my first slide that hudud is basically what we call the raison d'etre of PAS, right? Means that, you understand the meaning of the word raison d'etre? Yeah, second one, please. Could you switch on the light, and this one easier for people to have a look at it? Yeah, now, because it's the raison d'etre of PAS, of course, PAS has the right to promote its agenda, its main agenda, that is hudud and Islamic State. I believe that it can be done within a democratic society, which is like Malaysia. Right? And I don't have any qualms if PAS wanted to promote its agenda. Right? I'm not going to talk about politics regarding Buku Jingga and so on and so forth, because he is a politician and he knows more than me. But the thing is that what I'm trying to say is that PAS, while promoting its agenda, is trying to silence the Muslim dissidents and also the non-Muslims by saying that hudud is a divine law that no Muslim can question and hence is inevitable. If you're a Muslim, you cannot question, right? Then you become murtad. Then you become, kafir. And if you are non-Muslim, why do you care? It doesn't involve you, right? So that is the rationale of PAS. PAS is trying to silence both. Silence the Muslim dissidents and silence the non-Muslims. In the end, they hold what they call the ultimate truth, and this is divine, right? Something divine that cannot be questioned. Now I challenge that precept. Is it really divine? I say no, it is not. While some articles of what we consider as hudud or PAS understand as hudud, for example, can be found in the Quran, but there are many articles in the Kelantan hudud law, hudud bill, for example, that do not have any basis in the Quran itself. For example, he mentioned just now, he gave a lecture on what hudud is all about. So I want to quote, for example, apostasy. Was there a penal code or a hudud for apostasy in the Quran? No. Probably not many of you realize this, but there is none. No punishment for apostasy in the Quran. Similarly, there is no punishment for adultery in the Quran, right? There is no punishment for adultery in the Quran. Now we have this bill being passed by Kelantan, and yet they say this is divine. This is from God. So to me, it is basically what they call work of people to interpret God's laws in the Quran. Yes, nothing more than that. It is merely interpretation of human beings that that uses our agency, our mental agency. All right, and you have to understand that this concept of divinity is the one that says that gives basically credit to certain rulers. That's why we see that even some sultans, corrupt sultans in our country and elsewhere, they want hudud as well, right? Because it gives a sense of legitimacy for them, which I'm going to touch on my last slide on that. Okay, next slide please. Okay, before that, get back to the first slide. Yeah, one more point. And when they wanted to silence the non-Muslims, right? First, the Muslims you cannot question because you'll be kafir. The non-Muslims cannot talk because it has nothing to do with you, right? That was their argument. Nothing concerned them. We are going to implement this on Muslims, not on non-Muslims. Now I say that is wrong. Why? You look at a paper being presented by a former Chief Justice, Tun Abdul Hamid Muhammad. This paper was presented on the 11th of February this year, and I was present when this paper was presented at IAIS, International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies in KL, near UM, just beside UM. He said, why that, it is wrong to say that, this law, the laws will be applicable only to Muslims, because criminal law is not personal law or offences relating to precepts of Islam, as provided by List 2, State List 9 Schedule of the Federal Constitution. We quoted this in our statement this morning, right? Criminal law is a public law. The offences are offences against the state, not just against the victim. That is why it is the public prosecutor who prosecutes on behalf of the state. That is why we have AG chamber, right? Because it's a crime against the state. It's not a crime against another person, right? Now, you have to be clear about this. So, the non-Muslims, of course, they have voice to say, right, about this. You cannot silence them because they're involved as well. And secondly, just like what Shahrizan said about our Article 8, of course, it was against Article 8. Article 8, which is about what you call equality, right? So basically, it is, if you confine it to for the Muslims only, it would become inconsistent with Article 8 of the Federal Constitution, as it is a discrimination on ground of religion, one religion, and therefore unconstitutional, null and void, right? Because there is no equality, and equality is there, is there on Article 8. Of course, ISMA in their manifesto, they don't believe really in equality in their manifesto, and nobody makes any sound on that. Yeah, I was surprised. Okay, and of course the third, which was being mentioned by Sharizan, I won't go into that. All right. So I guess that's the first point, that why pass as the psyche that hudud must be implemented in this country, right? Okay. What is the second one? Next slide, please. Second one is the psyche, and we have heard this all over the country. Hudud could reduce crime rate. So people believe, and the past proponents believe, that by implementing hudud, we could reduce the crime rate. My question is, does hudud really reduce the crime rate? Does it reduce the crime rate? Now, look back at this paper by Chief Justice, all right? Paper by Chief Justice mentioned, you can just Google, go to Tun Abdul Hamid's site and Google for this full paper, right? It's a 12-page paper. He said that there is no data whatsoever to support the idea that hudud will reduce crime rate. There is no data. Nothing. Not a single data. Alright? And I want to quote this. In an article written by Aminu Adamu Bello from Faculty of Law, University of Abuja, Nigeria, titled Enforcement of Hudud Punishment under Islamic Law in Nigeria, Implication for a Plural Legal System. As you know, Nigeria is almost similar to us. The author stated that data do not support an assertion that the enforcement of hudud penalties has had any effect on the nature of antisocial behavior, especially armed robbery or hirabah in the states. Right? And of course, I want to basically comment a little bit about what YB mentioned, that the standard of proof in hudud is very high, right? So it's very difficult for people to be prosecuted. Well, I would say that the problem with the implementation of this kind of law is that, like Mufti Taqi Usmani, right, former Chief Justice of Pakistan, mentioned, in a case of rape, for example, right, there is not a single case where the perpetrator was being prosecuted, but the victim was being prosecuted. Why? Because they could not come up with 4 witnesses. It's as simple as that. And then you say there is justice? Of course it is not justice. Right? So this is the main problem that we are having. And people are propagating this, and as you know, that rape is not in hudud, under hudud law. Right? It's what he said just now. Clearly it was basically zina. Now that is the problem. Right? Not a single case, okay, in Pakistan, and that was by the former Chief Justice Taqi Usmani. So, and secondly, I would like to say, because this point about reducing the crime rate, also we have to understand that YB mentioned, the problem with the implementation is because it's being implemented by a state like Malaysia, not Norway. I would like to counter that by saying there is no reason for Norway to implement hudud. For Netherlands, for example, they close their prisons. Nobody is doing any crime. They have closed prisons in that country. And in Norway, what is the type of prison do you have? It's an open prison in an island, with full facilities. Open prison in an island. Because they're thinking of correction. They're not thinking of punishment. Not like some mentality of us, they would like to cut people's hand and stone people to death. Okay, next one please. Now look at the safest country in the world. Next one, yeah, okay. Which are this was the latest, okay, 2014. The safest country in the world, the first would be New Zealand. The second, Denmark. The third, Norway. The fourth, Iceland. The fifth, Austria. If you look at the 10th most safest countries, none in Islamic countries that practice hudud. Okay, get that point? None, okay? Now, my next point is that how is, based on this paper, which, I want to talk with, not just talk like rhetoric and things like that. Let's have some substance, okay, and evidence. So my evidence is that, I have two papers over here which I'm going to give to Yoglin later on. This paper by researchers from the George Washington University, published in the Global Economic Journal, Volume 10, okay, in 2010, how Islamic are Islamic countries. So it was a very long paper, about 36 pages altogether. So basically they had a formula and calculate the formula. Basically they look at the indices based on 4 sub-indices: the economics, the legal and governance, human and political rights, and international relations. Next please. Now, if you look at the Islamicity Index, okay, I square is the Islamicity Index, is basically the economic Islamicity Index squared plus legal and governance Islamicity Index plus human and political rights Islamicity Index plus international relations Islamicity Index. This was a very comprehensive study. Now, you are going to be surprised with this. Next one please. Alright. If you look at this Islamicity Index, which country do you think that would have the first ranking? New Zealand. Just the same country, the safest country in the world just now. So I want to say to PAS, rather than spending thousands of dollars to send delegates to Brunei to learn about hudud, why don't you send people to New Zealand to learn about how to manage a government? So if you look at it, it concludes, this paper, the long paper concludes that the adoption and implementation of such a system, respect for human rights, social and economic justice, that's what we are talking about, social and economic justice, hard work, equal opportunity for all to develop, absence of corruption, absence of waste and hoarding, ethical business practices, well-functioning markets, these are all good governance, okay? A legitimate political authority should result in flourishing economics. If you talk about good governance, your economy will flourish. Yeah? Not by putting a label as Rambi Mecca, but then you have rats as big as cats in the markets. These teachings, not the actual practice of those who are labeled as Muslims, should be the basis for judging a society's pretensions to Islamicity. Next please. So the results show that Islamic countries are not as Islamic in their practice as one might expect. Instead, it appears that the most developed countries tend to place higher on our preliminary Islamicity Index. Of course, it was a preliminary study. Yeah, next please. So the conclusion from this paper was that it is our belief that most self-declared and labeled Islamic countries are not conducting their affairs in accordance with Islamic teachings, at least when it comes to economic, financial, political, legal, social and governance policies. Next please. So you look at this ranking, okay? The first is New Zealand, the second is Luxembourg, the third is Ireland, the fourth is Iceland, the fifth is Finland. And where is your so-called Islamic country that amputate people's hand and decapitate people's head? Number 131. during my debate with Ulama Muda UMNO in UIA 2 years ago, I guess, when the moderator asked, can you give an example of an Islamic state? Your Islamic state, your version of Islamic state. He came up and said, well, Saudi Arabia. There, Saudi Arabia at 131. Yeah, that's Ulama UMNO, yeah. So, okay, my stand. Now, let's go to my stand. Come, next one, please. This is my stand, okay? My personal stand. It must be understood loud and clear that the eternal message of Islam is justice and equality. The severity of Sharia can only be understood if one bears in mind that the fundamental principle of Islamic law, no duty, okay, or what we call in Arabic as taklif, is ever imposed on a man without his being granted a corresponding right. So you cannot say, oh, you have to do this, but you are denying the rights of a person or a citizen. Next one, please. And among these inalienable rights of every member of society, Muslims and non-Muslim, okay, this is not in Mawardi time when they have this kafir harbi and kafir zimmi and whatsoever, right? Now we are all citizens, equal citizens of a country. Is the right to protection by the community as a whole. Next. Hence, the application of Sharia penalties are almost never applicable. Take this message home. The application of Sharia penalties are almost never applicable in a modern society where inequality is clearly abundant. What is the Gini coefficient? Anybody learn economy here? You understand about Gini coefficient, right? Yes. The Gini, what is the Gini coefficient of this country? We have a very wide economic disparity. And yet we want to implement hudud? It just doesn't make sense. So Sharia penalties serve as a deterrent with the objective to steer the conscience of the believer to gravity of the action warranting such a punishment. That is the most important fact that you have to understand, that it acts as a deterrent, right? The severity acts as a deterrent. It is not the severity of punishment itself. Okay, next. So it would have been a grave injustice when these penalties are applied to women and poor and never to the wealthy, the powerful and the oppressors. These were basically the stand of Tariq Ramadan, yeah, Professor Tariq Ramadan, when he wrote a thesis asking for moratorium of hudud in the Islamic world. My last slide, okay, my challenge to pass. Yeah, UIB is here. I say there is no need to convince the Chinese and non-Muslims that they will not be subjected to hudud laws. But to me, you have to voice out to the kings, the sultans and the Malay rulers that they are not spared from hudud punishment and they will be subjected to these laws as well, just like their subjects. Thank you.
Okay, right on time. I did not have to write the love letter. Thank you, Dr. Farooq. Yeah. Okay, we will reserve time for YB to to answer in this very friendly conversation and sitting side by side. So I did not have to sit in between them. So our next speaker, Abun Su Amin, kerjaya peguam, sudah berkahwin 3 orang anak, cucu? Tidak. Belum lagi cucu. Pangkat ada, pangkat cucu. Bidang tugas banyak terlibat dengan mengendalikan kes-kes tanah adat di Sarawak. Keterlibatan dalam NGO penasihat undang-undang Save Sarawak Rivers. Ya. Tadi saya mention tadi tak ada S. So it's all the rivers in Sarawak, not only Sarawak, the main river. Is there Sarawak river? Rivers. Rejang, right? The biggest one, yeah. Secretary and Coordinator Sarawak Indigenous Lawyers Association, SILA, penasihat undang-undang persatuan-persatuan berasaskan etnik di Sarawak, dan pernah tinggal di Semenanjung selama 21 tahun sebelum pulang semula ke Sarawak. That's a very short introduction to our next speaker, Encik Abun. Please.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. I thought of preparing my presentation in BM because I got this morning in Bahasa. Then I make it. It's okay. Then the Malay speak English. I'm a Sarawakian non-Malay speak Bahasa Malaysia. Ya, ini topik hangat saat ini yaitu hudud dan hudud at Malaysia ataupun hudud di Malaysia. Jadi pelaksanaan dan halangannya. Jadi kita sudah mendengar, we have heard many our friends said in the constitution, unconstitutional, and the practice of it and the implementation of it. So I will add some more hurdles to the implementations of this hudud because we are from Sarawak. I am from Sarawak and also represent the Sabahan of this from Borneo. For your information, yeah, and I see some faces, familiar faces here, like Brother Haris Ibrahim there. I think they know more about this thing for me as their junior lah, yeah. But I am talking on the perception of Sabahan or Sarawakian, how we see this hudud. And this is very hot topic in even in the Facebook nowadays, and Sabahan and Sarawakian, and some groups say them Sarawak for Sarawakian, and SSKM want to secede from Malaysia, whatever. Then of course this will give some impact on that matter if we not handle it carefully, yeah. That is another additional hurdle to this implementation of hudud in our country, di negara kita, ya. Jadi we want to look what is the basis or the parties that involved in forming Malaysia. We must know that this is maybe a revision for some and new for some. So inilah pihak-pihak yang terlibat dalam kerangka pembentukan negara Malaysia. So some of our friends said, when are you come to Malaysia? Bila kamu datang ke Malaysia? Ask us from Sabah or Sarawak. This is wrong perception of geographical perception. Bila kamu datang ke Malaysia? My answer was that saya sudah lahir di Malaysia. Because so this must be introduced or explained to some of our friends that still not understand what is Malaysia, what is Sabah or Sarawak. So actually all this we are Malaysian, yeah, Malaysia. So Kesatuan Malaya, Federation of Malaysia of Malaya combined with negara Sabah before that, and negara Sarawak and negara Singapura, which pulled out in the 1965. So I don't know when the status of Sarawak and Sabah become state. This is a big question for me. When it is become states in this federation of Malaysia. Actually, it is have the status of negara, country, or at least we say territory, one of the territory within Malaysia. Okay. So, of course, the laws or the agreements that binding us to form Malaysia, of course, Perjanjian Malaysia, Malaysia Agreement 1963. Yeah, I only give a very what we call that surface of it because I've been given a very short notice on this, maybe 2 or 3 days before this event. But it's okay because it is already in my mind, in our mind, in Sabah or Sarawakians of this agreement. Yeah. Jadi perjanjian 20 perkara and perjanjian 18 perkara. All this. Actually, this 20 perkara or 18 perkara or points. Actually, this is simplify the Malaysia Agreement altogether. So it put into for Sabah, it is 20 points. But for this, this is the basis of forming Malaysia during the early days before 1963. So, and of course, our forefathers agreed to form this country as a secular country. Yeah, that is it. Secular, negara sekular. So, which part have any connection with hudud here? So for me, I see when I read this 20 perkara 18 perkara, even in the first point itself, where in the first point, while there was no objection to Islam being the national religion of Malaysia, there should be no state religion of Borneo Utara or Sabah, Sarawak, and the provision relating to Islam in the present constitution of Malaya. The constitution that we are using now is actually from Malaya constitution, so we have to put some points to suit the combinations of Sabah and Sarawak to form Malaysia. So that is why they said the constitution of Malaya should not apply to Borneo Utara or Sabah or Sarawak. So that means, so if anything that will affect the state, the Borneo, Sabah and Sarawak, they will have to follow this agreement here, and by this agreement, by this first point, poin yang pertama ini akan menyebabkan perwakilan ataupun rakyat Sabah dan Sarawak, bahkan mungkin wakil rakyatnya, whether to agree to the amendment of the federal constitution. Okay, first of all, we have to see whether federal constitution need to be amended. Okay, if everyone is agreed, then Sabahan or Sarawakian YBs need to tell their people agree or not. So when we look into this agreement, so it looks like there will be another hurdle for the federal constitution, or for anyone who want to implement hudud to be passed in the parliament. Ini satu dia punya halangan dia, cabaran dia. So untuk hudud, apa itu hudud? I don't know. Just anyway we can get the tafsiran, tapi saya minta maaf kalau diharap di sini tidak ada masalah untuk kita sebut perkataan yang terlarang. Jadi ini federal constitution ya. Jadi takut saya nak baca. I afraid to baca ini. Nanti orang itu kan saya pula. Macam kawan saya pernah kena dulu, kawan kita pernah kena, dia quote ayat Quran habis kena hantam. Jadi saya tak berani. So just let it go, because they already explained it, and YB also explained about what is hudud, the good point of hudud. Let them explain. But for me, I'm concerned of Sabahan or Sarawakian. Nak baca ini takut saya. Kebaikan hudud, let them also explain. We already heard from them. So let them menarik minat kita lah, persetujuan bukan Islam untuk melaksanakannya. So not only menarik minat, tapi mendapat persetujuan. Ya, ini satu halangan-halangan dia ya. So fakta penduduk Malaysia kita tahu ada di sana. Saya sudah buat dia untuk saya punya, saya rasa tidak ada. Mungkin Melayu, coba tengok next slide. Next slide. Okay, itu lebih kurang fakta dia. Jadi kita negara ini multiracial country. Saya rasa for the countries that implement hudud, I think they almost only one race or not many races in their country. Jadi itu sebabnya mereka dapat melaksanakan hudud, dan maybe the Islamic ataupun the Muslim, maybe 99% of them Muslim. That's why they can implement hudud. So in our country it's very difficult to do it. Yeah, even to get the consent, of course under the Quran. Under the Quran kita tidak boleh persoalkan hukum itu. Boleh saya sebut kah? Boleh. Okey, kalau boleh saya akan sebut. Kita tak boleh persoalkan hukum Allah. Okey? Jadi itu pendapat orang Muslim. Itu pendapat orang Muslim. Tetapi ada juga kita orang percaya, orang Kristian. Kita pun tidak boleh menduakan Tuhan. Itu kepercayaan Kristen lagi. Jadi saya pernah debate perkara ini dengan kawan baik saya, sama-sama sekolah di university. So kita punya keputusan, you are committed Muslim, I am a committed Christian. So begini sajalah, we agree to be disagree. Itu persoalannya. Baru kami dua boleh senyum, jumpa sampai sekarang masih kawan baik. Memang dia kata dia punya betul, saya pun kata saya punya betul. Memang sebab kita ada dididik dalam satu kepercayaan yang berbeza, different belief. And of course Muslim kata mereka punya betul, Kristen pun kata mereka punya betul. Dan Muslim kata hanya Allah, hanya satu. Memang itu Muslim. Dan kita Kristen, kita percaya kepada Tritunggal, tapi itu semua explanation. Jadi sama-sama menerangkan, dia pun menerang kepada saya pun menerang kepada dia. So agree to disagree, dan itulah yang terbaik untuk kita di multiracial country dan multi agama ini, ya. Kalau tidak, kalau kita pegang, kita punya gaduh, kita memang gaduh. Okay? So that's why penduduk kita ni berbagai bangsa. Jadi kehadiran dari segi jantina lagi, dari segi pemahaman kita, for our understanding, this is what maybe those our friend from the government, from the barisan in Sarawak, menakut-nakutkan kita, nanti potong tangan orang pas, nanti amalkan hudud dia potong tangan. Kalau ini lagi, saya pernah belajar in our tahun pertama di dalam university. Kita ambil subjek UIS ke apa itu, jadi agama Islam. So dalam, walaupun saya bukan Islam, I score A+ dalam agama. You can check my transcript ke UiTM sana, result saya. Macam tu. Sebab kalau kita betul-betul committed dalam agama, kita mau mempelajari agama lain, kita buat perbezaan dia, kita akan dapat markah yang bagus. Macam tu. Ya, saya masa tu my thesis was about the difference between Islam and Christian. What is the principle of Christian and Islam? Jadi serba sedikit saya sudah tahu. Itu sebab saya dapat itu. So dalam pembuktian juga, saya ingat satu perkara Ustaz tu ajar, kalau hal menuduh orang berzina atau ialah menzina lah. Saya ingat satu ayat dia, umpama dia kata seorang yang apa namanya, yang soleh ke apa istilah? Yang soleh melihat benda tu umpama parang masuk ke sarungnya. Itu sebab dia beyond the shadow tu tadi. Jadi bagi saya, pendapat saya lah, my opinion, personal opinion, when we see this, jadi memang senang betul orang yang nak berzina tu buat hal. Itu masalahnya. Ini pendapat saya lah, with due respect lah ya, sorry ya. Jadi itu akan menyusahkan, ataupun kalau orang mangsa rogol lagi bahaya. Dan kita terbaca macam siapa tadi, Faruk kata tadi di Pakistan tu, orang yang kena rogol dia pula yang kena hukum. Ada saya baca dalam internet perkara itu. Jadi kita fikir betul-betul lah sebelum kita nak implement benda ni. Mungkin niat kita bagus, tapi kita tidak tahu hati manusia ni macam sekejap aibah, sekejap berubah. Ini menyebabkan hukum Allah itu akan disalahgunakan oleh manusia, ya. Jadi keperluan untuk pelaksanaan, ini dia tadi. Selain daripada amendment to the constitution, first, sebab we are ruled by the political party, so consensus by political parties ataupun pakatan parti politik, itu yang pertama nanti. Adakah, kalau ada konsensus itu parti politik, kalau tidak ada, di situ sudah gagal. Di situ sudah gagal. Ya, konsensus penduduk Islam dan bukan Islam, adakah kita bersetuju untuk ini? Sedangkan dalam Islam pun ada yang bersetuju, ada yang tidak bersetuju. So inilah halangan dia. Kalau benda ni ada, saya rasa satu kurang pun sudah tak boleh nak dilaksanakan. Ini masalahnya. Yang mudah di tempat negara yang implement dia, because they are maybe 99% Muslim. That's why they can implement it. Even implementation also yang mangsa jadi mangsa seterusnya. Ini yang masalah kita ya. Pindaan perjanjian Malaysia ini satu halangan tadi kepada Sabah dan Sarawak. Mungkin mereka akan melihat dari perspektif perjanjian Malaysia. Ya, dan pindaan kepada 18 dan 20 perkara lagi. Kalaulah mereka bagi konsen, jadi pindaan ini semua ini akan digali-gali untuk menyesuaikan. Sebab once Federal Constitution amended, it affect everyone because it is untuk seluruh Malaysia, bukan untuk Kelantan saja. Jadi kalau Kelantan buat nanti yang lain pun akan buat, yang Sarawak pun akan buat. Jadi kita takut. Jadi itu sebabnya Federal Constitution kalau di-amend dia bukan untuk Kelantan. Kalau dia untuk Kelantan, jadi dia against artikel 8 tadi. Nah ini masalah dia. So I think banyak halangan dia, dan apapun bagi saya, kalau saya dari segi positive thinking lah ya untuk saudara sahabat kita Muslim, memang cara untuk pelaksanaan ini mungkin dakwah di antara orang Islam kepada yang bukan Islam. Kalau sampailah kita, at least kita 99% kita Islam, mungkin kita sama-sama melaksanakannya. Mungkin begitu. Jadi dakwah itu untuk memberitahu kebaikan Islam itu kepada bukan Islam, kepada kami ini, mungkin tarik hati mana tahu kita dapat hidayah apa semua. Baru kita dapat melaksanakannya. Ya. Jadi saya rasa itulah halangan dia tadi yang saya kata. Jadi akhirnya kalau perlembagaan itu diganggu gugat ataupun perjanjian itu diganggu gugat, ini mungkin akhirnya juga boleh membawa kesan yang tidak baik, akan robohnya institusi Malaysia itu sendiri sebagai sebuah negara. Jadi kita kena hati-hati melihat semua perkara ini, bukan saja tertaluk pada pindaan perlembagaan, tetapi ada juga perjanjian-perjanjian kita membentuk Malaysia dulu. Jadi saya rasa itu saja untuk saya punya presentation. Thank you for your concern ya.